Will Texas finish back at the top of the SEC? Well, let's take a look at these 2025 projections before we get to 2025. Though, let's look back at some of the projections we've done from the last 4 years. Again, these are not my predictions. This is our formula that we use that you're about to see. And you can see in 2021 they were projected to go 8-4. They went 5-7. In 2022 they were projected to go 7-5. They went 8-4. In 2023 they were projected to go 8-4, and they blew that away at 11-1. That's really when they broke through. And then in 2024, a 10-2 projection, they went 11-1. So the last 3 years, they have actually beaten the projection by 1 game each year, or at least 1 game each year. I beat it by 3 games in 2023. Go back to 2021, and they were obviously a big disappointment. But it feels like those disappointing years are over for Texas. They are now starting to live up to expectations, and I expect them to be right there in the top 10, potentially top 5 again this season. So let's see what the projection looks like. Again, here's the schedule, and this is this formula that we use. Again, this is all based off of our tier rankings for 2025, our way too early tier rankings. And so if Texas, for example, Texas is in tier 1, if they play a tier 2 team, they're going to have a 61 to 70% chance to win that game. If that game is on the road, however, then it becomes a 50-50 game, and that's kind of the way it's calculated. And I do like to say you can kind of look at this in terms of point spreads. That's not what it's based off of, but it does kind of work out that way. 50-50 games are games where spreads are usually going to wind up 3, 4, 5 points. 61 to 70 games where the spread will be closer to a touchdown. 7, 8, 9 points. 71 to 80 games where the spread's probably going to be double digits, and then 80 or above. Those games where the spread will be 20 or more, and those games are counted as wins in this formula. So you can get to the wins here. You've got several of them: San Jose State, UTEP, Sam Houston, Kentucky, Mississippi State, Vanderbilt, and Arkansas. Now, all of these are not the same. You know, San Jose State, UTEP, Sam Houston, those games are probably closer to 100%. Kentucky on the road right after playing Oklahoma, that's probably closer to 80%. And again, this is based off of our tier system. There is no personal picks here. I'm not making any predictions or anything like that. It's simply plug in the formula. This is how it comes out. So yeah, that could be Arkansas. I don't know if I'd put Arkansas in the green. That might be a game that I'd put closer to 75% because Arkansas is not bad, but it is at home. And again, with our tier system, that's where it came out in the formula. So these games, again, counted as wins, games that Texas should win. It would be a pretty big surprise if they were to lose any of these games, unless we get into the season and Kentucky turns out to be a top 25 team. Obviously that would change things, but based on how it looks right now, these are wins that Texas should get. So now let's go to the games in the purple. You've got Oklahoma and Texas A&M. These are games where I think Oklahoma will be favored by about a touchdown. They are in a tier above both of these teams. So Oklahoma, Texas A&M's in tier 2. Oklahoma's actually in tier 3, but because it's away from home, that's why that one does turn out to be in the purple instead of the blue. If that was a true home game for Texas, it would be in the blue. And again, rivalry game, if you're looking at the human element of this, I would never put that game in the blue, even if Oklahoma was supposed to be terrible, just because of the rivalry and everything we've seen in the past. But again, just based off of our formula, it does come out in the purple. So Oklahoma and Texas A&M, games that Texas will be favored in, but you don't feel great about those games. You feel like they should win if they bring their A game, but if they don't, those games could be a little bit tricky. So yeah, rivalry games there, those will be tough. And then you've got Ohio State, Florida, and Georgia. So these are going to be the 3 biggest games, in my opinion, the 3 toughest games of the season for Texas. Ohio State's going to be a tier 1 team, just like Texas. It's on the road. That'll be tough. Ohio State's probably going to be favored by a little bit in that game. Georgia, Texas, again, a battle of 2 tier 1 teams. Games at Georgia probably going to be favored in that game. So if they lose both of those games, you're already down to 10-2. You can't really afford another loss. So that makes that Florida game huge. Now, Florida is in a tier below Texas, but because it's on the road, again, that does make this a 50-50 game. So if they lose all 3 of those games, Texas probably not going to get to the college football playoff because they're not going to have a lot of great wins. Their best win outside of those 3 games will probably turn out to be, Texas A&M, maybe Oklahoma. So those are 3 huge games all on the road, and they need to win at least one of them, in my opinion. If they lose, or if they don't win one of them, I think they're done. If they only win one, then you've got to take care of business in every other game. Of course, that we don't know exactly how it's going to play out, because let's say they lose to Ohio State and then they lose to Florida, and let's say they lose to Georgia and they finish with 2 losses. Well, what if they still get into the SEC championship? So, there is still a path for them to get to the playoff with 3 losses, depending on how the SEC goes, but it'll be very, very tough. So, in my opinion, if you're Texas, you need to get to 10-2. So let's see what the actual projection is, and the projection for Texas is 10-2. So that is exactly where they are projected to finish. Again, when you break it all down, you look at the odds here. You got Ohio State, Florida, Georgia, and then you got Oklahoma and Texas A&M. So you have 5 games that could be a challenge, and 3 of those are 50-50 games. So the odds would say you're going to win, what, 1.5 of those 3 games, and then again you might find another loss in there when you add in Oklahoma, Texas A&M, or potentially you lose 2 games to those 3 50-50 opponents. So 10-2, I think, is a very fair projection with some very tough games on the schedule. It's really weird because they really have a 5-game season, in my opinion, if they don't stumble in these other games. Like, there's 5 big games for Texas. They need to go 3-2. That's got to be the goal. Of course, you want to go 5-0, but I think that's going to be pretty tough, again, with 3 very difficult games on the road. So how does Texas stack up with the other teams in the SEC, just some of the teams at the top? Well, they've actually got the best projected record. Their 10-2 projection is number 1 in the SEC. You see Georgia, Tennessee, and Ole Miss. Those 3 teams projected to go 9-3. Now, Tennessee and Ole Miss are Tier 2 teams, along with a bunch of other Tier 2 teams, but the way their schedule's set up, it gives them a much easier path to get to 9-3 or even potentially 10-2. So that's why you see those teams at 9-3. Georgia with a difficult schedule, even though they're a Tier 1 team, they have the same record projection as Tennessee and Ole Miss, again, 2 Tier 2 teams. But Texas, the clear front runners based off of these projections in 2025.